So James has obviously many wonderful things in logic and has worked with Peter as well for a long time. I always, when I think of James's work, I always come back to cyclic proof theory, but I think he's going to talk about something else today. But when I think about James, I always come back to cyclic proof theory.
Why is this not showing?
It's a good question, isn't it?
Can you just... I did test this laptop earlier, but somehow... No, that's the HDMI.
Well, something's working there, almost.
Yeah, it's just...
Dicey connection.
I can try it because I think it's going to look at that. But it shouldn't look like that. That's how it's in. One better.
Try to present the screen.
I mean, it should show my screen regardless, right? This is the full screen. I don't think it's the laptop. It's
HDMI stopped working. Yeah.
Oh,
okay. There we are.
très bien.
Finally. Looks like we have a buffer.
Yeah. Nice.
Let's see. It's now not the right place.
That'll do very nicely. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Nice to be here. I'm James. When I told my partner that I was going to come here today, I said, I've got to go and give a talk at 9:45 on Sunday. I'll be away for most of the day. And the fee is about sort of, getting on for £300. And she said, oh, that's really good money, James. I think you should take it. Have you ever tried to explain the academic publishing and talk circuit to a civilian? Anyways, so setting the tone early, as we like to. So I'm here, of course, for my good friend and yours, Peter O'Hearn. We've known each other for a very long time. I came to London in late 2006, early 2007. I was working for Cristiano, who's not here today. But I met Peter very soon after that. And then, and at that time, in the 2000s, late 2000s, I mean, if you were a young man or woman interested in logic, then the place to be was Peter O'Hearn's famous office, generally on a sort of Friday lunchtime or kind of afternoon, where many wonderful things would be discussed. I think I never actually sat on the couch. I feel like I never got to sit on the couch because I was always late, and people were it was already fully occupied. So I would do a bit of standing. In fact, the only place that was more to be that was not Peter O'Hearn's office was probably the Carpenter's Arms, where we used to go for sort of what we call a kind of Friday social. And this quote here, "Are you thinking about logic or about your sins?" is apparently something that Russell said to Wittgenstein back in London. And was sort of, and just like in Wittgenstein's kind of case, it's kind of hard to say exactly which is the case here, but it's probably logic. I'm going to say it's probably logic. There's a few more miles on the clock for everyone, including the jacket, which I'm still wearing today. Anyways, I thought I would do what I traditionally do, and have been doing all these things, which is sort of give some kind of half-baked kind of talk about some logical kind of idea that's not this, it's far from fully formed. One of the things, I'm actually here, what I will call the first wave of O'Hearn colleagues and postdocs is quite well represented here in the talk roster and in the room. I'm here more in the capacity of what you might call the second wave, sort of, the kind of postdocs and colleagues who are the postdocs and colleagues of Peter's postdocs and colleagues. So, I mean, and by now, of course, there will be like a third wave and perhaps even a fourth of people that have been, so that, you know, the ripple effect is well in effect. Anyways, this is some work I've been doing with Jules and with my good friend Aquinas Hober. He would like to have been here, by the way, said hi, but he's having to do a student viva in Singapore. So, but he would have been here otherwise. So I thought I would kind of finally, after 20 years, maybe sort of start thinking about concurrent separation logic. It seemed like a propitious time to kind of start. And there's lots of like nice, interesting, logical questions kind of left behind from the pioneering work there. The thing I wanted to start by saying is that when you're thinking about heaps and you have some notion of permissions on those heaps, usually taken to be rational numbers in 0, 1, where 1 is write permission and anything less than 1 is a read permission. But even then, there's at least two natural notions of separating conjunction on those kind of heaps. And one is what you might call the vanilla one, but I would call it the strong one, which I'll denote as this kind of asterisk here. So strong conjunction just says, doesn't matter what values or what permissions are being stored in the heaps, if they are separately, strongly separated, then they are not aliased. And that's captured by this. If you have a pointer from x points to a with permission half, strongly separated from y points to a with permission a half, then doesn't matter, you know that they are not aliased, therefore x is not equal to y, not aliased. And then there's also a weaker notion which is used more often in the permission setting, which is if the values agree, heaps are allowed to overlap a little bit, they're compatible if they agree on the values where they overlap, and where they overlap, you can just add up the permissions. So if you have two halves of something, you can make one, basically. And that's that's this weak conjunction which I'm writing in this circle here. So if I have x points to a weakly separated from y points to a, each with permission a half, there are then two possibilities. Either they are not aliased, x not equals y, or they are aliased, and in fact they denote one full pointer to a. So pointer with points to a. All well and good, and this was understood for a long time, and this notion was proposed a long time. So the problem comes that if we want to reason exclusively with this weak notion of conjunction where we overlap the permissions, we add them up, is that it doesn't play too nice with inductive definitions, or actually more generally any imprecise predicates. So here's our good friend Mr. List segment here. I've sort of seen him many times, but I've used the weak separated conjunction on the working assumption that that might be all I have available in the logic, and if it is, you've got a couple of little difficulties, because this guy, because of the use of the separating conjunction, what does a half list segment look like? List x to y with permission a half. Well, one way of doing it is you take a pointer from x to z, say, and then a half permission to y, and then, because you're allowed to loop, you come back around with a half to z again, so you've got this sort of panhandle list, but then you take another half of z to y, so you've got this extra one here. So you basically overlap yourselves, adding up the permissions a couple of times. I know you understand this, Matt, because you pointed it out back in like 2005 or something like that with your paper in with Fortnite. So just getting around to it now. So that's the same as, like, you know, a list where the permissions are not uniform actually throughout the list. What it should be is a list of pointers, each of which you own with permission a half. But because of the way it's defined, because of the weird properties of this weak conjunction, it's not necessarily so. And in general, it means that you don't have a nice distribution of permissions over the weak separated conjunction. This works in the other direction. So if you have two, and it's generally you have this with any imprecise predicates, you're opening yourself up to this kind of nonsense. And so that causes various kind of problems if you want to do any reasoning in this setting. So my conclusion, you know, I mean, I argued with Aquinas over this quite a while, and he came up with various kinds of permission models where this, where the interaction is a bit nicer. And then after a while, I think I said, well, why don't you just use both? Just have the biscuit and the cake. You know what I mean? So if we think then about the general case of, I should probably say the idea is you use the strong conjunction to write your definitions, because that's what you actually mean when you're writing the definitions. And then you use your weak separated conjunction to describe the division of memories between threads. That is the sort of rough idea. But of course, it's never so simple as that. So if we think about the sort of standard concurrency rule for weak separating conjunction, then I should say what the meaning of these judgments are, because you have this channel invariant thing, J. And intuitively, it means that if we weakly join J, the invariant, with the precondition P, and you run C in that state, then you get a final state if it terminates, resulting in J weakly separated from Q. That's not the entire definition of the judgment, because it's usually horrendously complicated and long, but it is a consequence of the definition at least. So we can kind of work with it as a sort of rule of thumb. You can get the normal frame rule for weak separating conjunction just by taking C1 as skip and B1 as A1 in this rule, then you just get the frame rule back. The problem though is what happens with the frame rule for the strong conjunction, which of course is wanted, because even when you're reasoning in CSL, you will still have to do some reasoning which is essentially sequential about the definitions and such. So, and the problem is the frame rule, the strong frame rule for star, you'd kind of think it would be all right, but it's not. So if you think about a command that sort of receives resources in from the invariant, this isn't usually a command that's considered normal CSL, but you can simulate it using atomics and this kind of thing. So basically, this receive command basically just from an empty precondition and invariant J, then it basically just results in the postcondition of whatever it is. So you just borrow J for a bit, and then you're going to give it back later. So then an instance is, for example, if the channel invariant is a half pointer from X to A, so it's read only because it's half, then receive will just borrow that for a little bit. But then if we consider joining with the strong star, framing in the other half of that same pointer, well, that's okay. So we get this. So this is just an instance of the frame rule. But now we have a problem, because the precondition is satisfiable. It makes perfect sense. The precondition consisting of the combined invariant and thread pre is just the full pointer from X to A, sort of half XA, weakly joined with half XA star emp, which is fine. But on the other side, the postcondition is half X points A weakly separated with the strong conjunction of these two things, which of course are supposed to be non-aliased, but of course so that's actually unsatisfiable. So in this way, we have a valid premise, but we have a conclusion that cannot be valid. And you can kind of see that actually some of the problem here is, in a sense, coming from the nesting of the weak and strong separating conjunctions, which basically one of which semi-distributes over the other, but not the other way around. And so the kind of proposed remedy, which we don't, strictly speaking, know if it works yet, is to insert this precondition, which basically says that for our specifically chosen J, P, and frame formula F, we can sort of, we can actually do that juggling and bring the precondition into the weak separation without breaking anything. And so that's what that precondition says. And actually, the previous example that showed the failure of the frame rule, I mean, this tie condition at least eliminates that example, because that condition does not obtain there. So I've instantiated my J, P, and F with the previous slide, and on the left-hand side we again have full pointer from X to A, and on the right-hand side we have false. So I just want to finish up, and what I want to say is that what we hope Jules and Aquinas and I, is that the frame rule for star, strong star, is now sound without psi condition, and so we can play around in our nice CSL with both of our separating conjunctions, and it will all work very nicely. But the fact is, we kind of hope so, but we haven't yet checked. I always try and as I say, this is kind of half-baked. I always only try and come and give a talk when I feel as though I have something worthwhile to say, which is why I've been a complete recluse for about 2-3 years. But it's kind of forced out of retirement, out of my teaching halls by this invitation. So we hope so. We're not sure. One thing to kind of say is that usually the semantics of CSL judgments is basically the full definition. I said it was complicated, and it's usually obtained by kind of baking in applications of the frame rule. So somehow the problems of showing the soundness of the frame rule is devolved into proofs of soundness, more complicated proof of soundness for all the atomics, the individual rules. So that does not seem to quite work in this case, or at least we think it probably doesn't work. We're not really sure. So one kind of possible approach is more complicated again, is that the semantics for the judgments will now have to bake in not just applications of weak frame, not just applications of strong frame, but actually somehow, in a sense, arbitrary sequences or nests of both kinds of framing. And since I have no more knowledge yet on this subject, I'm going to stop at that point, except to say it is a little bit late, obviously, but happy birthday, Peter.
Okay, so we've got plenty of time for questions. So, Peter, would you like to take the first question?
Okay. So, does the human write the strong separating conjunction anywhere outside of an inductive definition in the typical course of events, the way you see things?
It would probably come in the course of proving things about those procedures, because you whack on an extra pointer or something and do some allocation. So yeah, it does. I think it does come up, but the main place where you would see it, I think, is inside of these data structure definitions.
Supposing you had a magical theorem prover that could prove everything, then would you think like you write the strong conjunction is in the inductive definitions, and then you can forget about it when writing pre and post conditions?
Yeah, we thought about that. What you sort of hope is that maybe we could silo off the kind of sequential part of the reasoning. We have a sound system for that. We do that, and then we sort of import it wholesale into like the second layer, which is the concurrent layer. And we're not sure that doesn't work. That is also an idea that we've been kind of considering. I seem to remember there was a couple of cases in which we couldn't quite make that fly, but it was sort of the first thing that we thought of, yeah.
And I think you want to be able to play with this. I think you want to be able to use the strong star whenever you can, because it's just easier and stronger. So the default is the strong star, and you fall back into the weak star when you do the nitty-gritty sharing stuff.
The weak stars for emergencies only.
Any more questions?
Maybe more just a comment. But when you say these things where you want like arbitrary nestings of the strong and the weak star, then it sounds to me like you really want to go after the analog of the semantic local action condition to get the closed form of that arbitrary nesting. Like you really want that semantic condition.
Well, I'd be delighted to have it.
You got to have that.
So I have a question. So do you get an adjoint to both of the types of separating conjunction, right?
Yes. Okay. Because if you want to think of it this way, the two kinds of separated conjunctions really at the semantic level just denote two different types of composition on heaps. And they're basically just the diamond binary modality reading of those of the sort of lifting those two binary operations to modalities, if you want to think of it that way, and that means that they come naturally with adjoints.
Okay, cool, thanks. Any last questions? No. Okay, let's thank James for a great talk.
Oh, yeah.